Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome you all to the first webinar of PES Day 2020, organized by IEEE Power and Energy Society Sri Lanka chapter. Today, the webinar topic is renewable energy for developing countries. We have Mr. Ranishka Wimalasena, who is an energy expert from Asian Development Bank at the South Pacific Regional Office in Fiji, covering the energy sector operations in six Pacific island nations. Before moving to Fiji, he managed ADB energy sector operations in Sri Lanka. He has 16 years of professional experience, mainly in energy sector, but also in project management and industrial engineering. Ranishka contributed immensely for the development of first utility-scale wind project in Sri Lanka at Mannar Island, and also his active contributions sparked the development of solar rooftop programs in Sri Lanka as well. Ranishka holds a master's degree in energy planning and policy from the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, and a bachelor in electrical and engineering from the University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka. I kindly invite Mr. Ranishka to continue the session, and also for the Q&A session, we have a link emailed to you as well. The link will be posted in the Zoom chat for your convenience as well. Please submit your questions to that link for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Over to you, Ranishka. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akila. Good afternoon, good evening, or even good morning to all of you from wherever you are. Today, the topic is mainly about renewable energy development, but specifically for the developing countries, identifying the lessons from so-called developed countries, and then how we are going to link it to the developing countries where we live these days. Before I start the presentation, I want you to take through this graph where we can have a glimpse of how it actually began. If you look at the early years in around 2005, the investment for renewable energy was around 50-60 billion US dollars. But now by about 2018, you could see that goes up to about 250 billion. This is on 2018 dollars, which is about fivefold from where it was in 2005. And the most important thing is you could see the gradual increment in the investment. Despite there's a reduction in the cost of each and every renewable energy technology. The most important point here is if you look at 2005, where the investment is mostly from developed economies, whereas after about 2013-14, you could see that there is gradual change in the investment from the developing economies, and also the gradual trend in larger investments, except for a few years where are specific reasons. If you look at 2009, it's because of the global economic crisis. In 2012, it's mainly because of the 2011 Arab Spring, where the demand grew because of the oil shortage, production shortage in the Arab. But if you look at, there's gradual increment and also the tendency for the developed economies investing more and more. Also, it is important to see how the renewable energy development evolved from the history. And if you can remember, or if you have read, it's mainly started in the 1990s, where one specific event was the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, where all these clean development mechanism and carbon credit all began. That's where that's more or less the same time where there was a trend in Europe and America for clean energy development, mainly through ad hoc development, because whenever there's a state in America wanted to introduce renewable energy, so they started investment, and also in Europe, almost every country started investing in um, renewable energy. So that is where the trend began. But it was mainly ad hoc, distributed here and there, small scale development, because everyone was trying to understand how the renewable energy works. So everything was small scale. And one of the main inputs at that time was the RPS, Renewable Energy Portfolio Standards. Most of the cases, it was mainly capacity targets, whereas in some instance that they can say we want to have 100 megawatts of renewable energy by this year, or 1000 megawatts of renewable energy by this year. And in certain countries or in certain states in America, these targets were percentage based. 10% of renewable energy by 2010, or 15% of renewable energy by 2015, likewise. These were mostly initiated by state regulators in America and the regulators in specific countries in Europe. As I indicated earlier, these were mainly distributed developments. Wherever it was possible, so they started bringing in these technologies and the investments. But the catalyst at that time was incentives by respective governments and states, mainly through subsidies, through tariff. And if you are familiar, it's based on feed-in tariff mechanism. The calculation for feed-in tariff could be on avoided cost or cost base, but it was mainly on feed-in tariff. Everyone who can contribute gets the same tariff. But also there were tax benefits for manufacturing, mainly in Europe. And the promotional, these were mainly on promotional basis, not on pure financial basis. There was no proper methodology of calculation, but it was mainly on promotional basis because that was a trend. And this time you would see mainly countries like Germany and Spain, they started investing more and they started flooding the markets. Then that was the same time you would see there was investment coming from the private sector around 2005, 2007. And mostly these investment from private sector was from oil and gas companies because they saw the trend and the benefit of renewable energy. So these were the companies who were trying to invest in renewable energy. And subsequently, there was a change in the emphasis for large scale development, specifically in China and also in India. And then came the concept of large scale renewable energy parks, where it moved from subsidies or tariff, feed-in tariff, to competitive bidding and auctioning. And that's where all started to change. But at the same time, you would see there was tremendous development in technology. The things that we were talking earlier about, the reliability, intermittency, stability, was somewhat trying to negate through different technological development, mainly through storage and also through forecasting. And this technological development, if you can remember the first graph where the investments increased, but also the cost came down because of the technological development. But the game changer or the catalyst was the Paris Agreement in 2015, where you moved away from targets for the developed countries, but more or less to the targets of for each and every country through SDGs and NDCs. That was the turning point for this large-scale development. And that was the same time that you see the availability of financing through climate financing, green bonds, and also the other financing availability through multilateral development banking or the other ways of financing. I would like to go to this slide where you could see the trend now. If you look at by 2018 to 2019, you would see roughly about 2,500 gigawatts of installed capacity of renewable energy, which is roughly about 35% of the total installed capacity in the world, which is compared to in 2018, roughly about 33%. And out of these 2,537 gigawatts, roughly about 1,200 are from renewable hydro, roughly about 620 by 2019 is from wind, and then roughly about 590, 600 from solar, which is 47% from hydro, roughly about 25% from wind, and 23, almost same, from solar. Also, towards the latter part, you would see the increment is mainly from wind and solar. Now, this graph, you would see one very important aspect, which is you would see the capacity additions from renewable energy. There's a growth in every year. But if you look at the absolute value, there are changes specifically last year. But also you would see the decrease of trend in the non-renewable energy. And you would see this going forward. And the new capacity, as is indicated in the previous slide, 90% more or less from wind and solar. And the capacity growth during the last year compared to previous year, 2018, was about 7.5%. If you look at where it actually comes from, it's mainly from Asia. Asia accounts for about 50%, more than 50% of renewable energy additions in 2019. But if you look at the global context as of last year, again, global share of the total installed capacity, who is leading, which is Asia, which includes China and India, but also the other countries. Europe and South America, also North America. North America, Europe is where we get the lessons, but Asia, South America, which is mainly Brazil, are the areas where following the developed countries. If you look at the solar additions last year, it's mainly dominated by China, India, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, which is all of these countries are from Asia, and then followed by countries like United States, Australia, Spain, Germany. Wind, again, dominated by China, followed by United States. Anyway, I'll proceed with this. Now, also, there are two key aspects of renewable energy development or the trend. One main point is the technological development, and the second one is pricing. These two are interlinked, because development in the technology can actually have an impact on pricing. But if you look at the pricing, you would see the picture. The notable change compared to 2010 and 2017, there's comparison for every technology, but the solar PV, the drastic change in the average price of energy, roughly from about 36 cents or 35 cents to about 10 cents. And also there's change in wind onshore mainly. That's a slight change, but still it's a change from where it was in 2010. But if you look at, apart from CSP and offshore wind, every other technology can compete with the prices of the fossil fuel. That's what matters in today's context. The levelized cost of utility scale solar, as I indicated earlier, see the trend. It's continuous decreasing trend of price, mainly because of the technological advancement and also because of the competition. And you would see from this slide the cost of solar modules, whatever or irrespective of the technology, you would see a decrease in the trend of module cost. There could be differences based on the differences in efficiency, but the trend is it's decreasing every day. Same for wind, onshore mainly. Um, it applies for offshore wind as well, but you would see change or the decrease in the levelized cost of electricity. Compared to solar, the technological advancements may not be the same because of the decrease is not very significant compared to solar, but you would still see a significant price drop of from around 8 cents to about 6 cents over a period of 9 years. And similarly, the cost of the wind turbines. And interesting appearance here is the Chinese turbine prices, which were expensive early days, started to becoming more cheaper since 2005 or so. But if you look at the world leaders like Vestas, they try to compete. Their prices are getting down regularly. They try to compete, and you would see the differences in the United States prices of different scale of wind parks. You would still see a continuous decrease. So the message is, irrespective of the technology, there's a decrease in the price. The investment, if you look at the investment, the trend, again, since about 2014, 15, you would see where the investment mainly comes from China, followed by Europe, and significant contributors are the other countries in the Asia and of course India separately. Now, this is given the fact that there is a reduction in the cost of each technology, this is based on the investment on megawatt basis. And you would still see Asia dominates, which has, of course, China and India, but then uh, there are so many other countries who try to follow the renewable energy development trends. Now where we come to understanding what happened and what we can actually go forward. Access to finance is one of the key points as of now, because if you look at the availability of financing, it's mainly for renewable energy and sustainable energy. And it's very difficult to find financing for thermal based energy generation. And there's of course a natural trend for renewable energy because it is becoming competitive with any other technology. So there's natural trend. So there's financing available. And also climate funds, green bonds, green climate funds are available for renewable energy based energy generation. So that's one of the positives. And the intermittency um, is not a problem as it was used to be. There are delusions because of the technological development, as I indicated earlier, because of the storage, or because of the forecasting. Intermittency, as we considered, is the biggest issue early days. No more the biggest issue now. And the empowerment. The access for rural communities, energy access or electricity access, because of the distributed generation, renewable energy generation, where you don't have to be at the source of generation for large scale development. There's access for everybody now, and the job creation because of the same development, local development. During the manufacturing or during the construction, or it could be during the O&M, there's job creation for the local people. And the income generation, for an example, because of the solar PV, or people becoming producers rather than consumers. So this concept of prosumer comes into the picture. And there are places where the community actually contributes for the renewable energy development, especially in Australia and also in Europe. The community actually has a stake in the renewable energy development in the locality, where they gets the benefits, financial benefits. And competitive pricing, of course, as you have seen in one of the previous slides, the renewable energy can compete with thermal technologies now, except for a couple of technologies. Any other renewable energy can compete with the thermal or the fossil fuel based generation. And the sustainability, uh, which is a must now, given the climate change, and the resilience, especially for small countries in Pacific, Maldives, and in the Caribbean. The climate change becomes more and more important. So the resilience is also a bright side of this renewable energy development. Now let me take you through a few of the examples where we can actually get the lessons for us to go forward. I selected 4 specific cases. Almost all these countries are developing countries, but they had specific intervention where it proved that the renewable energy development is possible even in these countries. The first project is this Cambodia solar power project. Almost all of these projects are ADB related projects where I have first-hand experience. Cambodia solar power project. By the time we started this project, also let me give you a background of Cambodia energy system, which is roughly about 2,200 megawatt system, mainly from hydro, which is about 60%, and followed by coal power, about 25%, and then the thermal. Renewable energy, by that time, it was roughly about 2%. By this time, there was enough resources in Cambodia, but the renewable energy was not competitive enough because of the pricing. There were a lot of takers for development, but the main issue was the risk. Who would bear the risk? Mainly risk associated to the who would finance the transmission infrastructure, whether the transmission infrastructure would be available by the time the renewable energy or solar is developed, and the risk associated with securing land, purchasing or acquiring land, and the risk of the depreciation of the local currency. Tariff is not linked to dollar, it's a local tariff. So because of these risks, no private sector investment was available in Cambodia, though there was substantial good solar resource available. Now, when the concept of park development was introduced for large scale to catalyze this economies of scale, with the help of reduction in risk, which I mentioned earlier, transmission infrastructure was handled by the utility EDC. The land was provided by the government, which was already acquired. The tariff was based on US dollar linked tariff, which was already included in the power purchase agreements. There was reduced risk. And when this project was bidded out, there was enough competition. Roughly about 25 companies wanted to take part in this project. The entire park was 100 megawatts, but the first phase was for about 60 megawatts. Initially, it was less than 60. The intended first phase was 40 megawatts, but by the time we bidded out, we were able to secure about 60 a megawatt because the prices were competitive enough. The funding was blended, which means the transmission infrastructure and the land and the relevant cost were borne by the utility from public sector financing. And also the private sector financing was available for the park developers. So which was a blended financing available for both sides, for the private sector as well as for the public sector, both from ADB. Because of that, final outcome was we were able to achieve the lowest prices for solar in the Asian countries, roughly in the range of 3.9 US cents per unit of energy. And this can be the reference for the future projects in Cambodia as well as for the bordering countries in the region. One of the very successful interventions in Cambodia to change the way you can think for renewable energy development. The next one is in the Pacifics, Tonga. Just to give you a brief idea of what Tonga is, it's a 12 megawatt system and country, which consists of many small islands. The total demand is 12 megawatts. By this project, what we really wanted to achieve is the enhanced energy security, because almost all of these countries, small countries in the Pacific, are dependent on diesel-based generation, and which is having a large impact on their economy, and it drains a lot of their income. The target was again 50% of renewable energy by 2020 and 70% of renewable energy by 2030. And the main issues were, even if the private sector wanted to invest in these countries, the issue was how you can absorb this power because of many issues, mainly the technical issues as well as the financial issues. By this project, what we really want to do is to fund the infrastructure and the storage from the public financing. Whereas as soon as the storage facilities are available, the private sector can come from different sources of financing, but can install solar mainly. The battery storage from this project was roughly about 12.1 megawatts, which is equivalent to about 25.6 megawatt hour systems in many different locations in across Tonga. The private sector intervention was about 6 megawatt of solar from independent power producers, which was funded from another financing program available from ADB. And the outcome at the end of the day was mainly about the grid stability as well as load shifting because of the storage and the lower cost and the increased access for the rural communities. The third example is a project in Maldives. Again, to give you a snapshot of what Maldives energy system is, Maldives itself is a country with a lot of small islands. They have roughly about 190 inhabited islands, plus another 100 odd resort islands. The total electricity demand is roughly about 300 megawatts. 200 roughly in the inhabited islands and roughly about 100 megawatts in the resort islands. Greater Mala region accounts for about 80 megawatts out of the 200 megawatts. Now, by now, Maldives has 100% electrification, which is a substantial achievement given the geographical difficulties. But mainly, what Maldives wanted to do is to shift towards sustainable development, which ADB really wanted to help, and the reduction or the reduced dependency on the fossil fuel, because it was almost from diesel power generated small scale generators. That is how Maldives was functioning. Now for this project, there was financing available through public sector grants and loans through ADB, through EIB, through Green Climate Fund, in the range of about $100 plus million. By the end of the project, there was 24 megawatts of solar PV installed and roughly about 8 megawatt hours of energy storage in 160 islands out of the 190 inhabited islands. The outcome from this project was we were able to achieve 30% of the peak demand by PV and significant tariff reductions because we moved away from expensive diesel-fired generation to solar power generation. The last example is from Sri Lanka, where we were instrumental in development of the first utility scale park concept wind power project, roughly about 100 megawatts of installed capacity. The approach was Sri Lanka was having wind power generation based on the feed-in tariff, but this was the first utility scale, so there was the requirement for technical and financial benchmarking. Technical benchmarking to see whether this is possible to run on semi-dispatchable basis, and the financial benchmarking to see what the tariffs would be offered if it is based on competitive bidding because of the economics of scale, if it is a larger park concept development. Obviously enhance energy security because of the diversification of the sources and as indicated the utility scale development. There was funding available from both the public sector for the entire project. Outcome was to establish the benchmark price. Of course, the government of Sri Lanka and the CEB was able to achieve a benchmark price, which can be used for future competitive bidding as the benchmark price. In addition to this, one specific point of this project was the enormous pressure came from different aspects of the society because of the environmental sensitivity of this site. Though it is one of the best wind resource sites in the country, but also it was one of the very sensitive sites in terms of environment because this is exactly sitting on the bird migratory path and also a lot of highly sensitive environmental protected sites. But the outcome, though the project is not yet completed, the government and the utility was able to establish the price which can be used for future competition. Now, lessons for energy transition from the fossil fuel based energy to renewable energy. Of course, the developed economies, Europe and North America, started the concept of renewable energy development. But at this juncture, the developing countries have a benefit because you can leapfrog. The lessons that these developed countries went through by introducing different tariff schemes, subsidies are very well understood now. The technology is very well understood. So it's the ideal time or ideal chance for the developing countries to leapfrog. You don't have to go through the same path. So it's time for you to leapfrog. Policy consistency is one of the most important. And if you look at 10 years ago, the biggest question for renewable energy was technical intermittency. But now, for most of the developing countries, the biggest challenge is the policy intermittency. Whereas the policy keeps changing, the privacy investors are not willing to invest because of the less confidence because of the changes in the policy. So the government policy is the catalyst for development of renewable energy. And obviously, like countries, small countries like Pacific, they have ambitious targets to achieve 50% of renewable energy, 70% of renewable energy by this year. These are ambitious, but unless otherwise you have ambitious targets, you will not achieve. So that's one of the key points. Other than the policy consistency, ambitious targets for development of renewable energy is another key point. Competition today is a key because bidding and auctioning are established norms in this renewable energy business as of now. Feed-in tariffs, if any of these developing countries have not started, which is rarely the case of renewable energy development, feed-in tariff is sufficient to initiate or kickstart the renewable energy development, but afterwards it's the competition and the auctioning is the key. Like in the case of Cambodia, risk minimization for the private sector investment is very important. Otherwise you will lose out the competitiveness of the pricing. And enabling market conditions for the private sector to come into the play. The offtake risk, dollar intake, dollar linked tariffs, the market size, which needs to be large enough for the private sector to be attracted, and to reduce almost all the uncertainties because which can reflect in the price otherwise. As I indicated earlier, technology is no more a barrier because there are technological development in terms of storage and forecasting and how to deal with the reliability and the stability issues. But most of all, it's about the sustainability. The benefits, socioeconomic benefits, energy securities for small countries, whereas you don't have to depend on the fossil fuel or the imported fuel, and in most of the countries, remote countries, the energy access are the lessons which we can take from the developed countries. Let me leave with you with this slide or this graph which I received from Irina. Energy transformation by 2050. There's no second thoughts about it. The transformation towards renewable energy is the game for tomorrow, and how we do it and what lessons we can learn from the previous countries who actually initiated this is what we can have today. It's all about how we go about it, minimize risk, enabling policy, consistency in policy, and how we go about it by 2050. And every country needs to have their own path, own milestones on achieving this. Thank you very much. Dr. Akila.
Thank you very much for the informative session. We have waiting for questions and answer session. So as we told earlier, you can submit your questions to the link we mentioned. So we have few questions in line. So with the time being, we will be answering them. The first question we got was how to improve plant factor of solar and wind in Sri Lanka context. Can you share about the level of grid readiness you observe in Sri Lanka to integrate renewable energy in wider scale?
Can I answer the question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So if I, how to improve plant factor of solar and wind in Sri Lanka context, can you share about the level of grid readiness you observe in Sri Lanka to integrate renewable energy wider scale? Now in Sri Lanka, we were involved in doing a detailed study of renewable energy integration limits. This was based in roughly about the study was conducted in 2014-15, completed roughly in 2016. By that time, with the technology available, we were concluding the grid integration capacity is roughly about 20% of the off-peak demand, depending on the resources available. If it is off-peak, it's mainly based on wind. If it is a peak period, including the solar. But with the technologies available, if storage is available, we can achieve more, because most of the countries who have developed these technologies have gone much beyond these percentages. Sri Lanka has a technical disadvantage being an island, whereas other countries, mostly India, China, and Europe or America, because of their size of the grid or the network and the interconnection between most of the countries, they can go beyond. But in the Sri Lankan context, definitely it is beyond 20%. With proper studies and analysis, definitely you can establish the percentage for renewable energy integration. How to improve the plant factor? It's depending on the respective technologies. If it is solar or if it is wind, it's based on their technological enhancements for solar and wind, based on the supply as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question we got was, what is your opinion about vehicle to grid system, and can we use it for Sri Lanka in near future?
What is your opinion about vehicle to grid systems, and can we use it for Sri Lanka in near future, and what are the areas we have to focus to achieve it? I would say very important question at this juncture, where we try to, this is for Sri Lanka. Yes, it's for Sri Lanka, where Sri Lanka is trying to introduce e-vehicles. If you look at the overall context, whereas our energy system is mainly based on fossil fuel, whether it is prudent to move for electric vehicles is a question mark, because we are not replacing fossil fuel by renewable energy, because our electricity system is predominantly from fossil fuels. But if you look at from the perspective of load shifting, whereas during the off-peak, you still have must-run generation, it could be fossil fuel based, then that has advantage. But in the future, when we have more and more renewables linked to the power system, then obviously it's an option for to reduce the dependency on the fossil fuels or transfer from fossil fuel to renewable energy for vehicles. There could be technical developments which I will not touch, which I'm not much familiar with.
Okay, thank you. Another question came. What is the most suitable business model for this development, like build, own, and operate, or build, own, operate, transfer, like that?
For renewable energy.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at this is in general, I guess, not only for Sri Lanka. Yes. Now, if you look at most of these developments in renewable energy now is not utility based or utility owned. It's mainly private sector owned. So almost all of these renewable energy development are from private sector, build on operate or build on operate transfer. So the business model is very clear. It's based on a tariff. You establish a tariff between the IPP and the utility or the transmission licensee. That's the business model. Very simple.
The next question. What is the possibility of enhancing renewable energy utilization through microgrid structures in island nations like us, similar as Maldives? Is it financially viable, or any analyses were done by ADB toward this?
What is the possibility of enhancing renewable energy utilization through microgrid structures in island nations in Pacific and Maldives? Is it financially viable, or any analysis were done by ADB towards this? Now, microgrid concepts, which is new, but also been established in some countries. The advantage as of now, whether it is financially viable is a question mark. But in terms of access and the independency is what we consider and what we are favor of now. But for small scale microgrids, especially for small island nations, Maldives or Pacific, whether there is financial viability is a question mark yet. There is a microgrid pilot being done in Sri Lanka, which is not yet completed. LECO is handling the project with the help of University of Moratuwa. There are a few other microgrids developed in Pacific Islands, which I don't have much information.
Okay, thank you, Ranishka, for the valuable session. As the time being, we are closing the question and answer session as well, and I will hand over on Dima to make the final wind up.
Hello everyone. We are at the end of the first webinar of IEEE PES Day on Renewable Energy for Developing Countries organized by the IEEE PES Sri Lanka chapter. So we would like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Ranishka Wimalasena, an energy specialist attached to ADB at the South Pacific Regional Office in Fiji, for conducting this session for us by dedicating your valuable time. Thank you for sharing your experience and insights on this aspect with us. We hope the information that you shared with us will be helpful as professionals and students in the power sector. We hope thank you again for your thought-provoking and well-presented session. To dear participants, we are thrilled about the attendance we had, and thank you all who participated and helped to make this webinar a success. Hope you all will keep in touch with us for future webinars. At last but not least, We all are facing a global pandemic, COVID-19 these days. Hope you all are safe, keep distance and wash your hands properly. Have a good day.